Okay, so, we always love it when you all send in, interesting articles and stuff, and we definitely had a bunch this time. But um, this one from datapro.news really jumped out. Will vibe coding be the new normal of 2025? And honestly, spending time with this, it feels like we really are maybe at the beginning of like a huge shift in how software is built.
Yeah, I think that's spot on.
Yeah.
This whole concept of vibe coding, it's it really does feel like a big evolution. And for anyone listening who hasn't come across that term yet, it's basically all about AI-assisted coding. So instead of, writing out every single line of code yourself, you're using natural language prompts, basically just telling the AI what you want to achieve. And then tools like, GitHub, Copilot, ChatGPT, Replit, Ghostwriter, Cursor, they actually generate the code for you. And this reminds me of something Andrej Karpathy said about how developers are becoming more like directors, guiding the AI rather than doing all the handling coding themselves.
Yeah, it's a really interesting analogy, right? Because you're kind of setting the vision and then the AI is figuring out the execution. So I think for this deep dive, we really want to unpack what this all means, particularly for Silicon Valley, because the article makes a good point that often whatever's happening in Silicon Valley kind of becomes the norm for everyone else. And we should also, think about the bigger picture, like how this impacts data management, analytics, and the future of, engineering roles as we move through 2025. So let's just jump right in. The article talks about how quickly vibe coding is being adopted in Silicon Valley. This isn't just like a small group of people experimenting. It seems like it's spreading pretty fast.
Yeah, and I think the key thing here is that in Silicon Valley, things can go from, 0 to 100 really quickly. Like a trend can emerge and then suddenly it's everywhere. And it looks like vibe coding is on that trajectory. The article highlights how engineers are already using AI to handle a lot of the routine coding tasks. And we're seeing examples of like entire web applications being built using natural language commands. And developers are increasingly comfortable with just accepting that AI-generated code, maybe making a few tweaks, but not starting from scratch.
I mean, it's kind of mind-blowing to think about, right? Like a whole application just appearing because you told the AI what you wanted.
It is pretty remarkable.
And this isn't just, something developers are talking about amongst themselves. The article mentions CEOs of big companies, major news outlets like the New York Times and Ars Technica are all over this. And they're even throwing around phrases like 10 engineers doing the work of 100, which is a pretty bold statement.
Yeah,
Oh,
it is. And I think it highlights the potential for just a huge acceleration in product development cycles.
okay.
If AI can handle a big chunk of the coding work, then theoretically teams could push out updates and new features way faster.
Right?
But it also makes us rethink what it actually means to be a software engineer.
Yeah.
What skills and responsibilities are really essential.
Right, because if the AI is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, how do the roles and expectations change? And that brings us to what's happening within developer communities themselves. The article talks about all the, buzz and debate on places like Reddit, Hacker News, Twitter. It's not all positive, right? There are definitely some concerns mixed in with the excitement.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely a lot of excitement, particularly around the potential for increased productivity. Like the article talks about individual developers being able to scale their side projects much faster. And there are even vibe coding 101 courses popping up, which suggests that, coding could become more accessible to a wider range of people.
So there's that democratization aspect, which is definitely interesting. But then there's the flip side, right? Like, what happens to essential coding skills if we become too reliant on AI to do it all for us? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big concern. If junior developers, for example, are constantly relying on AI to generate code, will they actually develop that deep understanding of the core principles and logic?
Right.
And then there's the issue of technical debt, which basically means, taking shortcuts now that might come back to bite you later. AI-generated code might work, but it might not always be the most efficient or maintainable solution in the long run.
And the article also mentions warnings from experienced engineers about, subtle vulnerabilities and inefficiencies in AI-generated code, which is a bit worrying because it suggests that even if the code looks fine and runs without any obvious errors, there could be hidden problems lurking beneath the surface. It really emphasizes the need for careful human oversight.
Absolutely.
Okay, so given all this rapid adoption and, the mix of excitement and concern, how is this starting to impact hiring practices?
Well, the article points to a pretty clear shift in hiring trends, especially in Silicon Valley. Knowing how to use these AI coding tools is going from being a nice-to-have to a must-have. You're seeing job descriptions now that specifically list experience with tools like GitHub Copilot and ChatGPT as key requirements.
So it's not just about having a deep understanding of coding principles anymore. It's also about being able to leverage AI effectively in the development process.
Exactly. And we're also seeing the emergence of new kinds of roles, like people who can manage these AI-assisted workflows and even mentor teams on the nuances of prompt engineering, which is basically the art of communicating with AI to get the best possible code output.
Prompt engineering, that's interesting. It sounds like it's a skill in itself, right? Like you can't just casually ask the AI for code. You need to understand how these models work and how to structure your requests for optimal results.
Yeah, it's definitely a skill that's becoming increasingly valuable. But here's something that might surprise some people. The article cites economic analyses that suggest companies using these AI tools are actually hiring more engineers overall, both junior and senior roles. So it seems like right now, AI is augmenting the workforce rather than replacing it.
That's a really important point because there's been a lot of fear about AI taking over jobs. But it sounds like, at least for now, it's more about creating new opportunities and changing the nature of existing roles.
Right, it's about collaboration rather than replacement.
Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into the distinction between junior and senior engineers. The article mentions this idea of accelerated time to value for organizations when it comes to junior engineers. What does that mean in practice?
So basically, it means that junior engineers, those who are newer to the field, can become productive much faster than before. They can use AI to generate initial versions of features or prototypes that might have taken them weeks or months to build from scratch. This allows them to contribute more meaningfully to projects earlier in their careers.
That sounds like a great advantage. But the article also talks about a dual risk of superficial learning. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. The concern is that if junior engineers become too reliant on AI to solve coding challenges, they might not develop a strong understanding of the underlying principles. Things like system architecture, how different components interact within a system, and really importantly, secure coding practices. They might be able to produce code that works, but they might not fully understand why it works or how to troubleshoot problems effectively.
So it's like they're learning to use the tool, but maybe not fully grasping the deeper concepts.
Right, and that's where the importance of mentorship and training comes in. The article mentions that organizations are starting to incorporate specific AI tool training into their onboarding programs for new engineers. So they're trying to make sure that these new tools are being used effectively, but without neglecting those foundational skills.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about finding that balance between leveraging the power of AI and ensuring that engineers are still developing those core competencies. Now let's shift gears and talk about senior engineers. The article suggests that they might actually benefit even more from the rise of vibe coding. How so?
Well, for senior developers, vibe coding can be a huge time saver. It can handle a lot of the repetitive and routine coding tasks that they might have spent hours on previously. This frees them up to focus on the bigger picture, things like system design, strategic planning, and making sure the overall code base is high quality and maintainable.
So it's like they're being elevated to a more strategic level within the development process.
Exactly. And the article talks about this idea of the senior engineer becoming an AI curator, which I think is a really apt description. It means they're not just writing code themselves, but they're also evaluating and refining the code that the AI generates. And they're responsible for setting best practices for how AI should be used within their teams and across the organization.
So the expectations for senior engineers are changing too. It's not just about years of coding experience anymore. They also need to be skilled in using AI tools, and they need to have the judgment to make sure AI is being used responsibly and effectively.
Exactly. And the article points out that job descriptions and interview processes for senior roles are reflecting this shift. They're looking for people who have that blend of AI skills and proven expertise. But the bottom line is that senior engineers are still absolutely essential. They're the ones who bridge the gap between the rapid innovation that AI offers and the need for solid technical standards and long-term maintainability.
The article includes this really helpful comparative table that lays out the key differences and evolving roles for junior and senior engineers. It talks about how AI boosts productivity for both, but for juniors, it also introduces the potential for introducing hidden flaws, whereas for seniors, it's more about amplifying output and focusing on strategic concerns.
Right. In terms of skill development, junior engineers get exposed to a lot of things quickly, but they risk that superficial learning, where senior engineers are building on their existing expertise and adding new skills like prompt engineering and AI oversight.
And the responsibilities are shifting too. Junior engineers might be tasked with implementing AI-generated features, but they need guidance, whereas senior engineers are leading the AI integration, mentoring their teams, and ensuring everything is reliable and secure.
And finally, when it comes to hiring trends, there's definitely growing demand for AI proficiency at all levels.
Yeah.
But senior engineers who can effectively integrate AI and establish best practices, those are the people who are really in high demand.
So it's not a simple story of AI replacing human engineers. It's much more nuanced than that. It's about adaptation and figuring out how to work together effectively.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit and talk about the implications for data management and analytics. The article touches on several key areas here, starting with the potential for accelerated data pipeline development.
Right. So the idea here is that if software development is happening faster, thanks to vibe coding, then that also means data pipelines can be built and deployed more quickly, which could lead to faster insights for data teams.
But there's also a potential downside, right? The article talks about the possibility of lower quality code making its way into the data pipeline.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. If the code that's feeding the data pipeline is being generated very quickly without thorough review, it could introduce errors or inefficiencies that data teams will then have to deal with. So this really highlights the need for strong quality assurance measures within data management processes.
And that leads into the whole issue of evolving skill sets for data management teams. It's not enough to just understand data anymore. You also need to understand how AI-assisted development works.
It's exactly. The article emphasizes that data professionals will need to become familiar with these AI-assisted development methodologies. Understanding prompt engineering so they can understand how the code impacting their data was created and being able to evaluate AI-generated logic for security vulnerabilities, scalability limitations, and maintainability issues. All of that is becoming really important.
And thinking about existing data platforms and legacy systems, how does the rise of AI-driven development impact those?
Well, the article anticipates a kind of convergence of these worlds. Data management leaders will need to figure out how to integrate these new AI-generated components without disrupting their existing systems and without compromising data integrity or security. This could involve careful planning, lots of testing, and potentially even refactoring older systems to make sure they can work seamlessly with AI-generated code.
So it's not just about adopting the new tools, it's about figuring out how to make them work within the existing infrastructure.
Right, it's about integration and making sure everything works together smoothly.
The article also stresses the importance of risk management. With more code being generated by AI, there's also more potential for technical debt and unforeseen vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. And that speed that vibe coding offers could actually backfire if it's not managed carefully. So senior data professionals really need to prioritize code reviews even for AI-generated code. And they need to implement robust automated testing procedures to make sure everything is working as it should be.
So it's about balancing that speed with caution and making sure you're not sacrificing quality or security in the process.
Exactly.
Finally, the article talks about strategic resource allocation. If AI is boosting the productivity of software development teams, how might organizations choose to refocus their efforts?
Well, the idea is that they could potentially shift resources towards more strategic data initiatives, things like advanced analytics, developing sophisticated machine learning models, strengthening data governance frameworks. So this could lead to leaner, more agile teams that are focused on those higher value activities. But it also means that leaders need to invest in training and make sure there are strong oversight mechanisms in place so that the gains in productivity don't come at the expense of quality or security.
So it's not just about doing more faster. It's about doing the right things and making sure everything is still done to a high standard.
Right. It's about strategic decision making and making sure you're using these new capabilities wisely.
Okay, so looking ahead to the rest of 2025 and beyond, what's the overall picture painted by the article?
Well, the expectation is that AI-assisted vibe coding is going to become pretty much standard practice.
Oh,
We'll probably see AI literacy become a common requirement in job descriptions, and interview processes will likely adapt to assess how well candidates can work with AI tools. Data management and analytics teams will need to adjust their workflows to integrate with this new way of developing software. And the article expresses a cautious optimism that a lot of enterprises will adopt vibe coding, potentially using domain-specific AI models to manage some of the risks. They talk about ARIG-based LLMs, which means the AI can draw on specific internal knowledge to inform its code generation.
And it sounds like the role of those experienced professionals, the senior engineers and data leaders, is more important than ever in navigating this transition.
Absolutely. They'll be essential for striking that balance between embracing innovation and maintaining high standards, making sure that AI is used effectively, but without compromising the integrity of their systems.
So for data and analytics leaders, the message seems clear. Faster development cycles are coming, but with them come new skill requirements and new types of risks that need to be managed carefully.
Exactly. The article concludes by saying that the ability to integrate human expertise with AI capabilities is going to be the new normal for data engineering moving forward. It's not about AI replacing humans. It's about humans and AI working together.
Well, this deep dive into vibe coding has definitely given us a lot to think about. It really does feel like we're at a pivotal moment in how software is created and managed.
It does. And it raises an important question for you, our listener. Given all these advancements in AI-assisted development, what core skills do you think will become even more crucial for engineers and data professionals in the years to come? And how can individuals and organizations best prepare for these changes beyond just learning how to use the current AI tools?
Yeah.
It's something to really consider as we move further into this AI-driven world.
It's definitely a time of exciting possibilities, but also, some potential challenges. It'll be interesting to see how this all unfolds. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back next week with another fascinating topic.
Until then.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.